Hello you guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about all of my single eyeshadow palettes. I recently saw my friend Alex post a video where she talked about eyeshadow palettes in her collection from brands that she only owned one eyeshadow palette from. And I thought that was such a fun video concept idea. I am currently in the process of prepping for palette week, which will be coming at the end of March, and I'm going to be updating my if I had to declutter one series. And in that video series, any eyeshadow brand that I own 3 or more palettes from, I choose whether I choose which palette I would declutter if I had to declutter one. So I thought it would be really fun to chat about eyeshadow palettes in my collection from brands that I only own one palette from. Some of the brands I've definitely owned more palettes in the past and I've decluttered, and some of these I've just tried for the first time. Some of them maybe I own a palette and I'm not super impressed, so I don't plan to pick up another palette from the brand. We're gonna get into it all. If I didn't mention, I have 11 palettes to chat about today, so if you're interested, stay tuned. First, if you have yet to subscribe to my channel and you like project planning content, palette themed content, or just chit-chatting about makeup, I'd love if you'd consider subscribing before moving on. And other than that, let's jump into the video. I also just remembered I actually have 3 other eyeshadow palettes I only own one palette from. They were sitting in like my top drawer of things still to test. So we have a lot to talk about today. I'm actually surprised I only have 15 just because I feel like I've been dabbling more with indie. And so I figured there would be more indie brands that maybe I only owned one of, but alas, I was wrong. Let's start with brands that I have owned more than one palette from in the past, but I've since gone on to declutter. So I have 6 eyeshadow palettes that fall into this category, and up first I have this one from Juvia's Place. This is the Sweet Pinks by Juvia's, and I've owned quite a few palettes from Juvia's Place in the past. I'll be honest though, I've never been super impressed with their formula. I find that their mattes are much more difficult to work with than I personally like, and I feel like their color stories are really intriguing to me, but then I get the eyeshadow palette and I'm not super happy with the quality of the shadows. As you can tell, I have a really big eyeshadow pan on this right here. I actually had decluttered this eyeshadow palette in the past, but it was just sitting in my like declutter bin at my mom's house, and I actually ended up recluttering this into my collection because this was such a perfect palette last year during all like the Barbie craze. And I will say I don't have any shades quite like these, like quite like this, or this in my collection. So I do really like to keep this palette around for that. I absolutely love this shade as a nail polish, but in terms of like Juvia's eyeshadows on the eyes, I don't foresee myself purchasing any palettes from them in the future just because I'm not super impressed with their quality. Then I have the Glam One eyeshadow palette from Lawless, and I have owned a number of the Lawless eyeshadow palettes in the past. I owned the large, the One eyeshadow palette. I also owned the Baby One eyeshadow palette, as well as the Lavender One eyeshadow palette, and I really liked the Baby One eyeshadow palette for a while. But I have since decided that I just don't think Lawless has the best formula, especially as I've been diving more into indie. I prefer, if I'm going for a neutral color story similar to this or similar to the one out of the Baby One, the Baby One, I prefer my Natasha Denona. I've kept this one around because I do enjoy the Glam One. And again, I used to really love the Baby One. I was so disappointed in the Lavender one. So I don't know if I'll purchase any more Lawless palettes in the future. It depends. I'm not gonna say never, because they are always a brand that just intrigues me, and we all know I love the Lawless forget the fillers, so I do love to support the brand. Next up I have the Dominique Cosmetics Latte palette. This is the only palette I still own from this brand, and I believe I've only ever owned 2 eyeshadow palettes. I think there was like a Thunder eyeshadow palette that I got in a BoxyCharm, and then also I can see the packaging, it's blue and white. I owned that palette as well. I was not super impressed with the quality in that palette, and then the BoxyCharm palette just wasn't a color story that spoke to me. This, I feel like, is a palette that's like consistently on the chopping block, and I really don't know why, because I do really like the warm matte browns in the top. The quality in this eyeshadow palette is really good, and honestly, these like cooler tone metallic shimmers are right up my alley, so I really should be reaching for this palette more frequently. Dominique Cosmetics did release an eyeshadow palette around the spring Sephora VIB sale last year that definitely caught my attention. But again, I just am not super interested in like mainstream eyeshadow palette releases anymore. So I don't know if I'll ever purchase from Dominique Cosmetics again. The quality's been hit or miss for me. I really like the Latte palette, but like I said, that other eyeshadow palette, I want to say it was the Wild one, but it wasn't. That just didn't work for me. Next up, I have the Persona Identity 1 palette, and I did own Persona Identity 2 at one point, but I just was not reaching for it. Identity 1 is one of my favorite eyeshadow palettes in my collection, and honestly, if Persona released another palette with like a color story that spoke to me, I definitely would purchase it. I think she makes a phenomenal eyeshadow. I love both her mattes as well as her shimmers. Her shimmers are just so smooth on the eyes. I'm a big fan. Again, the color story would have to speak to me, but I definitely would purchase from Persona again. Then I have my Viseart palette, and I have owned quite a number of Viseart palettes in the past. And I feel like, I don't know what it was about the past, but I just didn't get how to use Viseart palettes. But I love this eyeshadow palette. Viseart's formula is definitely more buildable, and that actually works better for me. I don't know why I didn't like that in the past. Maybe because I was just getting into makeup and I thought everything had to be as pigmented as the ABH shadows, but I actually really enjoyed this eyeshadow palette. I like the like pale yellow, I like the pop of blue, and I have some perfect neutral browns in this palette. There have been a number of Viseart palettes that have caught my attention. Granted, it is a more expensive brand, and I haven't bit the bullet to purchase anything else, but I anticipate that I will eventually buy more Viseart palettes. And then the last palette that I've owned other palettes from the brand before is Tarte. Right now, the only Tarte palette I have in my collection is the Tartelette in Bloom palette. I have repurchased this palette because I decluttered it in the past and missed it so much, just because this is like the perfect take it everywhere with me palette, and I'm gonna get a not a very exciting look, but something that's very quick, simple, and easy to create that makes me feel pretty. So I do really enjoy this palette, but I will say nothing from, well, that's a lie. I will say there's definitely been some Tarte palettes that have caught my eye. There was like a Juicy palette, I believe. It was like pink outer packaging. A lot of the larger Man-Eater palettes I feel like have gotten really good reviews, but nothing to push me over the edge of actually purchasing. Okay, and then I just realized I actually have owned a second palette from LH Cosmetics as well, but the only palette that I still have in my collection is this cute little Shimmer Saga quad. I would absolutely purchase from LH Cosmetics again. The palette that I decluttered was the Daybreak palette, and I just wasn't super interested in that color story, but I do really like this little quad, and she released another quad, I think around the holidays this year, that I was thinking about picking up. It's just a little bit harder to get LH Cosmetics, which I feel like is part of the reason that I don't own more from her. But I do really like the quality of this, and I could see myself purchasing from the brand again. All right, and then the final 7 palettes, was it an even 7 and 7 split? 1, 2. Just about every palette that I'm looking at, I would purchase from the brand again. Let's start with this. So I have my Sugar Pill Fun Size Mini Color Palette. I actually almost purchased, there was a palette that released like an extension of this, I feel like, and I almost bought it but didn't. I have actually been looking at the Sugar Pill website to purchase some of their singles. Oh gosh, that was a bit ago. I honestly don't even know what's still available at Sugar Pill. I've owned this palette for so long, and I definitely don't do like a lot of like matte colorful looks, and I feel like I've got what I need throughout my indie shadows. I feel like Sugar Pill is more expensive, so I don't necessarily know. I'm not like seeking Sugar Pill out, but if they release like a cute little palette like this again, I definitely would pick it up. Okay, then I have the Moira Fun is in the Air eyeshadow palette, and I won't say I won't ever purchase from Moira, but I was not super impressed with the quality within this eyeshadow palette. I found that there is definitely something to be desired within the matte or within the shimmer formula. They're quite lackluster on the eyes, and if you like more of a satin, you might really like this, but I wasn't a huge fan. The matte formula was fine, but specifically within some of these brighter neons, it definitely took a lot of building up, and I felt like I had to place down like a white liner to really make them pop in the way that I wanted to. Granted, Moira definitely comes in at a more affordable price tag. I want to say this was maybe like $20. But honestly, I'd rather like save my money and spend it on something that I'm going to be overall happy with the entirety of the palette. I also think their packaging is a little bit bulky. I don't want to say never, because I am definitely interested in some of their single eyeshadows as well. I feel like they have some really bright, like metallic, punchy singles. We'll see. We'll see what happens with Moira. Okay, I pulled this out to remind myself that I do own the Cleota Dragon Fruit palette, but my palette broke, so I had to like depot the shades. Now granted, this is just like a collection of Cleota singles. If Cleota released another eyeshadow palette, I definitely would purchase. The Dragon Fruit palette was an all shimmer palette. I would love to see them release something with like a few mattes mixed in, just because I love like at least a couple of mattes in my eyeshadow palettes. But the Cleota formula is absolutely incredible, and I definitely want to purchase more singles from them. They're just kind of expensive. And if they released an eyeshadow palette, I would definitely be interested in picking it up. There have been so many times I've almost purchased more palettes from this brand, so I know I will be purchasing more in the future. It is Fantasy Cosmetica, and the only palette I currently have in my collection is the Druid palette, which is such a beautiful eyeshadow palette. I am in love with this color story. I really want it's like the purple, I think it was the first palette they released. I think it has 4 of the shimmer shades. I definitely want that eyeshadow palette. I just have not bit the bullet to purchase it yet, but Fantasy Cosmetica is definitely a brand that has my attention, and I'm always interested in the releases. I just haven't yet gone on to purchase anything more, but I know I will own more from this brand in the future. All right, next up I have the It's Belle Cosmetics. I personally own the Flare palette, and I am a big fan of this. Yes, it is an all shimmer palette, but I really love all of the shimmers that are in this eyeshadow palette. I think they're really impactful and stunning on the eyes, and I absolutely would be interested in purchasing more from the brand. I know they have a couple other like 9-pan all shimmer palettes, and I hope that, and I'll be interested to see if they release anything this year or anything new. I just kind of like fell onto this brand's website. I might have been actually on just like the shop app, kind of like scrolling through, and I really wanted to try more indie brands. And I think this came in at maybe like $30 or $32, which definitely felt more approachable than like the $60 palettes from some of the indie brands that we're seeing. Again, really happy with the quality of this. I know an all shimmer palette is more of a companion palette, but I don't mind with this formula. And then the final 2 palettes that I have to share, I haven't yet finished testing, but I did pick up the Space Chemistry palette from Terra Moons. I have owned and still do own quite a few singles from Terra Moons, and I just felt like when I saw the swatches of this palette, I was literally drooling. I thought it was so beautiful. You have 2 matte shades, and then you have 3, 6, 10 just really beautiful shimmer metallic special shades. Terra Moon makes such a beautiful special shade on the eyes, so this was very expensive. And again, I literally haven't even tested this yet, which shame on me. I'm so excited to, but I feel like I'm doing that thing where like I'm putting it off because I don't like want to dip into like the beautiful palette, or I'm like worried maybe I'll be disappointed. I know I won't be though. And if Terra Moons released more eyeshadow palettes in the future, I would definitely pick it up. I love a palette over like having to like pick my single shadows. Even though when you pick your single shadows, you very specifically get to pick the shades that you want. There is just something to be desired about an eyeshadow palette. So, and then the last palette I have to talk about is the Blend Bunny Cosmetics Surge palette. I have not yet gotten around to testing this either, but I'm very excited to dive into Blend Bunny. Ooh, that actually reminds me. Okay, I have one more palette to talk about after this. Shame on me for not getting it right in the beginning. Anyway, I'm very excited to dive into Blend Bunny because I feel like I hear so many good things about this brand. I am so excited about this bottom neon row. I'm gonna have so much fun with that in the summer. And I'm just excited to test out a new indie brand. If you guys have any indie brand recommendations, let me know, because I'm excited to continue to keep diving into more indie this year. And then I almost forgot, Cosmic Beauty. I only own 1 palette from them. It is the Muse palette, but I want every single eyeshadow palette that this brand has ever released because I was so impressed with the quality in this eyeshadow palette. I think this retails for only like $25 or $26, and you get 20 shades, and the formula in every single shade in this palette I was blown away by. The mattes were so easy to work with, so blendable. didn't muddy up, looked beautiful with one another. And then the metallic shades are just chef's kiss on the eyes. Seriously, I understand the hype around this brand, and I absolutely will be picking up more from them in the future. But after that, you guys, those are the 15 eyeshadow palettes throughout my collection. Those are the 15 brands that I only own one eyeshadow palette from. I would love to know in the comments below, what single lady eyeshadow palettes do you have lingering in your collection? What singles do you own? Who needs a pair? Who are you never gonna get a pair for because you just do not like the eyeshadow brand? Let a girl know in the comments below. Other than that, thank you so much for sticking around to watch today's video and for supporting me and my channel as you guys always do. I love you guys so much, and I will catch you in my next video. Bye.